So we're in week 3 of Advent, and if you're new to the Advent experience, it's probably helpful for you to know that Advent is not a Bible word. It's not found anywhere in the Scriptures. It's actually a Latin word. It just means coming, or it means arrival, and it might be a real surprise for some of you that it wasn't until after 300 AD that even Christmas was on the calendar. And the reason is we don't have a precise date when Jesus was born, and so the early church fathers, it just seemed appropriate to them to put his coming, his arrival on the calendar in December during the December solstice, which is the darkest time of the year in the northern hemisphere. And so you got this beautiful metaphor for us that in the darkest season, the light of the world breaks in. So with that, I want to spend a few minutes talking about light. And it's interesting because if you're a student of the Bible, or maybe you're not a student of the Bible, what you need to know is that one of the designations that Jesus gives himself is as light. He is the light of the world. And then later on, he gives us the lesser designation of light and lights of the world. And so I know when I was even kind of working through the text this week, I realized, like, for some of you, this idea of teaching on light feels really small or obscure because we're like, light? I mean, like, you can teach on light for like 10 seconds, right? It's like it gives us revelation, or it helps us to see into dark places and dark spaces. But what I want to do is I want to tease this idea out, because I know, like, nobody in the season is going, I need more light. I mean, I know that. Nobody's going, I need greater revelation, or I need to see in the dark. Like, all of us are like, what we need is hope. Or what we need is more peace, or what I'm longing for is more clarity in my life, or a greater amount of joy in my life. And so what I want to do is if you'll allow me, I want to take a few minutes, and I want to talk about light, and I want to show you how light, the light of Christ, is actually tethered to deeper joy. And so if you're longing for joy today, if you're longing for something to come alive in you that really can only come alive by the resurrection power of the Spirit, the coming of His grace into your life, then that's always, in some ways, tethered to light. So we're in Isaiah chapter 9. And if you're new to the Bible, Isaiah is in the Old Testament. And if you're new to the Bible or new to church, welcome. But if you can't find Isaiah, which is sort of a tricky book to find, you can just use the table of contents. We all start there. But here's what Isaiah the prophet says. Beginning with verse 1, he says, "But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, or for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Okay, so Isaiah starts this conversation in this really obscure way by referencing lands that I would imagine most of us have never heard of, the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. Admittedly, I read that. They sound like 90s rock bands, don't they? It's like, oh, dude, I just love Naphtali, right? It's like, right, that's what you do with long hair, I've heard, okay? Stick to the notes. Okay, let's go back to verse 1. He says, "But there will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea." Okay, so I'm just making a big assumption today that most of you are not boned up on your Israel geography, me included, but it is helpful to know just a little bit to understand this text. So that's why I want us to go to school for a second. So this is a map of Israel back in the day, and you'll notice in the the most northern part of the map, you've got this land called Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. And it's helpful to know that these were the lands that were always conquered. They were always attacked, not only first, but they were just constantly getting conquered, constantly getting the beat down by these foreign invaders like the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians. And then what would happen is then those foreign invaders would come down into Israel through the Fertile Crescent, which makes sense. That's where all the water is. That's where all the crops are. And so Naphtali and Zebulun, they're always getting conquered. They're always getting the beat down. They're always the first to get conquered. What I want to do, I want to kind of just pivot, and I want to talk about SEC football just to illustrate this, okay? I know that's a weird pivot. So nobody goes to Vanderbilt for the football. Am I right? I think I'm right on that. You go to Vanderbilt if you want to get a medical degree, right? If you want to go and do some good research, right? And so nobody has ever accused Vanderbilt of being a football powerhouse. Nobody's like, they are football conquerors. It's just the opposite, right? The other teams go to Vanderbilt and they're like, we're going to conquer. Whatever is theirs is going to soon be ours. We are going to conquer. We are going to pillage. And then Vanderbilt just plays this really humble role of the ones that say we're going to be pillaged. We just know we're the team in the SEC that's going to get conquered again and again and again and again. And I tell you that because Vanderbilt is the Zebulun and the Naphtali of the SEC, okay? Their role is just to constantly get the beat down. And this is what Isaiah's saying. Isaiah's like, listen, I know there has been this shadow of shame and this perpetual disappointment of defeat over the land again and again. That has become your identity as a conquered people, okay? And then in verse 2, he changes the tenor and he says, but in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. And so he's like, okay, Zebulun, Naphtali, in the former days, you were in defeat, you were getting conquered, you were walking in darkness, but in latter times, the time that's coming soon, there's going to be a moment where you're going to walk in light and you're going to walk free. And then in verse 2, he's going to make the same point, but he's going to not use geography. He's going to talk about people. He says in verse 2, he says, the people who walked in darkness, it's the people of Naphtali, the people of Zebulun. He says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. So this is not about land anymore. It's about people. It's not about geography or buildings. It's about covenant. It's about relationship. He's like, it's not really about what you've stepped into. It's about who I've made you into. And I know this may feel a little confusing if you've got any church experience, because you've probably read some of the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, it feels like the zenith is when the Jews, when the early people of God, the Jews, when they took possession of the promise. This is time for you to speak. The promised land. We're like, okay, that's the point, right? For them to take hold of the land. But God's like, even in the middle of them taking possession of the land, he's just reminding them again and again. He's like, the land is not your inheritance. I'm your inheritance. I'm your source. I'm the promise maker and I'm the promise keeper. That's who I am. Now, here's the thing. This makes sense to most of us. I would imagine, even if you're not a Christian, this probably makes sense to us, because when you have your phone out and it's the middle of the day, like noon, it's actually hard to read your phone, right? I mean, because the sun's coming down, unless you turn the contrast up. That's when you can see it. But when you're at home and you're in your bedroom, all the lights are off, you turn your phone on, you can see it clearly, like no problem. And the reason is what we all know, is that light is most effective. Light is most powerful when things are the darkest. Like, we know that. Now, it's more true even in spiritual realities. And the reason I say that is every one of us, we've been in trouble. I mean, some of you, you're in trouble right now. And when you and I are most desperate, when we find ourselves walking in the deepest, darkest seasons of our life, it's actually really easy to see Jesus as the light. It's actually the most arrogant thing when you and I are walking in self-sufficiency, which we have the habit of doing. It's in that moment where we go, I don't need any more light. I got to figure it out. I don't need light. I got my own light. And this is where Isaiah pivots in verse 2. He says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Now, I think Isaiah, he's sort of giving a wink to 700 years in the future when Jesus is walking on the earth. And what's happening then is you've got all these people that are following Jesus, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people initially following Jesus. And the religious people hated Jesus for it. Like, they really hated him. One of the reasons is because you got all the wrong kinds of people following Jesus. And just, if I can insult you a little bit, like, it's people like us. Like, it's the people that are dumpster fires. I mean, I know I got my new sweater on, and I got, I'm all ironed up, but, like, I'm a mess. And I'm terminally inconsistent, just like you. And these are the people that are following Jesus. And the best, maybe the greatest gift of being a dumpster fire, being terminally inconsistent, is we're usually self-aware that we're a mess. We know that we're in darkness, and it's in that moment that Jesus is clearly seen as the light. Yeah. Okay, so here's the question. This is where we're going. It took a long time to get to this. So the question that we're going to kind of process here is, what does it then look like to live into that light? If you and I are walking in darkness, if you and I are walking and we're in trouble, what's it look like to walk in light? What's it look like for Isaiah to say that light, the light of heaven, the light of Jesus, the coming Messiah, what happens when light, what does it mean when light is tethered to joy? And this is what Isaiah is going to get at in the rest of this text. He says in verse 3, he says, you have multiplied the nation. We don't have time for this. He's referencing the Gentiles coming in. You've multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice. And rejoice is just the verb of joy, right? So he's like, you're joying. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. So Isaiah's like, okay, joy's coming. I mean, maybe, and we don't do this a lot, why don't you just say that out loud? Joy is coming. Joy is coming. And he's like, and by the way, joy is not like happiness. Happiness is not bad, but happiness is always singularly tethered to circumstances. When the circumstances change, so goes your happiness. But joy is sometimes tethered to circumstances, but it's always designed to be the landscape of our heart. It's designed to be the landscape of our soul. And he's like, joy, that kind of joy is coming. And he's like, it's going to be the kind of joy when harvest is here. Now, the problem for these guys is that it's not harvest time. It's conquering time. It's pillaging time. It's lost time. And yet Isaiah, just prophetically, he's like, but joy is here. Joy is coming. It's going to break into the darkest, deepest places of your life. And now a couple ideas around this is the reason Isaiah connects light to joy, I think, and this as I was praying through this, I think the reason he connects light to joy is because when you and I are walking in light, and there's a lot of people walking in darkness, but when you and I are walking in light, the light of Christ, you and I are able to see what's available to us. When you and I are walking, and by the way, people walking in darkness, they don't know what's available to them. They don't know what's right in front of them. They're just scratching around them, hoping against hope that things will change. But those of us that walk in the light, we are able to see what is true. And then we position our life. We position our hearts. We position our affections to what is true and what is available to us. Let me unpack this in a couple different ways. The way that you and I have a lifestyle of joy, and I'm assuming that's what we all want. I mean, I'm not talking about fits and starts of joy. I mean, the way that we have a lifestyle of joy is not by closing our eyes to the darkness. We are not people that are perpetually in denial that darkness and pain and loss and betrayal is part of our life. What joy does is it positions our life. It opens our eyes to see what's actually available. Here's what I mean by that. I think, and this might be, I might be off on this, but I think joy is going to be the greatest commodity we'd have in heaven. We walk in heaven, and it's just joy that's going to flood our soul. And the reason I think that's the pinnacle for us is because Jesus, on his worst day, the moment of deepest darkness for him was on the cross, when he went to the cross for us. In the place of deepest darkness, loss, betrayal, on the cross, Hebrews 12 says it was for the joy set before him. that he endured it. Meaning, he said, there's darkness all around me, but I'm going to set my eyes, I'm going to set my gaze on not only what's available, but what is most true over my life as the Son of God. And it was that joy that caused him to endure through the cross for you and for me. Okay, let me do a couple more. One of the other pictures that Isaiah paints for us is this picture of battle and war. And if there's ever a season of the year that we feel like we're stretched and taken advantage of more, it's this season. And so what he's going to say is that the battle that we're in is going to produce a kind of joy. And it's interesting because when we think about battle, we think loss, right? I mean, if you have a son or a daughter that goes to war, what you're most afraid of is that they will lose their life. Like they're gonna come back in a box. And so when we think about battle, we think about loss, we think about pain. And he said, when I want you to think about chaos, when I want you to think about battle, I want you to think about the joy that's available and the joy that's coming. He says this in verse 4. He says, for the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. There's so many pictures of battle and war in Isaiah. But what Isaiah's saying to the people, what he's saying to us is he's like, listen, I know you're in a war. I know you're in a battle physically. I know there's a spiritual battle. I know that you have lost big time. You've lost people. You've lost friends. You've lost family. You've lost your land. You've lost an identity. There is a loss of confidence for the future. But he's like, but I want you to hold on to this. Someone is coming that's going to do battle for you. And when he comes, you're no longer going to have to take up the sword. You're not going to have to do battle on your own. In fact, the last time you take up the sword is when you turn it into a plowshare. And then you're going to look around on the battlefield, all the people you've been doing war with, those are people of the gospel, and you're going to look around and it's just going to be all hugs and high fives. And then a white-hot worship, a foolishness will spring up out of the blood-soaked ground. That's how joy comes out of a battle. So Isaiah is essentially saying, I know you've been in loss. I know that's been the definer. Defeat has been over your life. I know there has been perpetual night. But dawn is coming. Light is coming, and it's going to be in the form of a child. The illustration the only illustration I could really come up with, this is imperfect. Don't judge me for it. Don't email me for it. I'm not even sure Isaiah could imagine this kind of an animal, but I want to talk about the emperor penguin. And I don't know if you've watched any of the documentaries. The emperor penguin, it's really amazing. This animal, it waits and waits and waits for months in the dead of night, in the dead of winter, waiting. And what the emperor penguin is waiting for the dawn of spring to break in. And so what's happening, if you've never watched any of these documentaries, that's your homework for Advent, right after church today. But what happens is the emperor penguins, they're all males, and they've got their newborn chicks in their feet, and they're huddled up, huge huddles, hundreds of penguins, and they rotate from the outside to the inside because the outside of the huddle is the coldest and the fiercest wind, and then they rotate back in and get warm and to keep their chicks warm, and then they rotate back out. And all the while, the females, they're off hunting all winter, right? I just feel like the dude's got it easy. I don't know how that happened. And so the females, they're gone all winter. They haven't even seen their chicks except once. They give birth, and then the wives leave and they go to hunt. And the husbands are the caretakers. And so months and months and months, the men are not eating, they're suffering, they're waiting. It's darkness. And all they're doing is waiting for the break of dawn. And here's what's so beautiful about creation is that in that moment, the moment that dawn breaks, at the very same time, the female penguins, they return. At the very same time of light breaking into the darkness, their wives return. And then what happens, this is what's so amazing, is the huddle of hundreds of penguins breaks up, and all of the males, they do this really fun penguin dance. I mean, for like an hour. They are celebrating. They are rejoicing. They are putting joy into verb form, and it is a silly, silly kind of worship. But if you've ever been in an environment like this and you've seen somebody just going after it, and you go, that's foolish. I would never worship like that. And it's only because you haven't been through the night and seen the day. Because worship springs up out of resurrection darkness. And I really believe some of you are in that space today. I believe some of you came in today with a desperate heart, and you're like, I'm in a place of darkness. I'm in a place of desperation. And I'm going to give God one last shot. But I'm telling you, if there's one thing you can hold on to about our God, is He is a God that has a perfect track record of breaking into dark places. He has a perfect track record of coming into a place that is against all odds and coming out as victorious. And He does that for you. He does that for me. Let's do one more. Verse 7. I love this so much, and I wish I had time to really unpack all of this, but he says, of the increase of His government and of peace, there will be no end. Let me just stop here before I get into this. I just want you to notice this whole text, Isaiah is talking about it as it's already happened. This is 700 years before the Christ child, before the Messiah, before the Savior of the world steps foot on planet Earth, and Isaiah is speaking about it as if it's already happened. That's how faith operates. When you and I begin to operate in a way where we say, I'm going to say this, I'm going to speak this as if it's already happened. That's not a kind of foolishness. It's a posture of trust. God, what you say is true. I'm not saying you walk around going, I have a Mercedes. Like, don't be stupid. Don't like, this is not about getting more of what you think you want. It's about tethering our lives to things God's already said. And even if you read something that God has said, but you don't see that it's true yet, you can speak about it as if it's true because it's already true in the heavenlies. And Isaiah, that's what he's doing. 700 years in advance, he's like, I know there's a Messiah coming. I know there is an Advent hope. I know there is an Advent joy tethered to light from heaven. And so I'm speaking about it as if it's already true. And what he's saying here is he's like, someone is coming. So let me finish reading this. He says, of the increase of His government and of peace, there will be no end. And on the throne of David and over His kingdom to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. I love that last phrase. I could just spend 30 minutes talking about that last phrase. The Lord of hosts will do this. And so I just want you to hold up that one thing in your life that you're like, there's no way God could do this. There's no way God could heal a marriage. There's no way God could heal a body. There's no way God could reconcile this relationship. There's no way God could heal a betrayal in my heart. And I just want you to just speak this over your life. The Lord of hosts will do this. This is the God who loves to break into dark places. But what Isaiah is saying specifically is like there's a king coming. It's not just a child born in a manger. He's a king, and He's the King of Kings. Now, the reason this is a little confusing for the Jews, we have time on our side to sort of process this, but for the Jews that are reading this, they're like, we're not really sure how to read this because they have sort of a strained relationship with the kings of Israel. Because if you know anything about the kings of Israel and Judah, they're sort of a mess. I mean, the worst kings, the bad kings, they're villains. Even the best kings, they're sort of clowns. Right? And so when Isaiah's like, hey, there's another king coming, they're like, great, another king? He's going to be a letdown. And he's like, no, he's the King of Kings. He's the king that rules all other kings. He's a king that embodies perfect peace. He's a king that embodies perfect provision. He's a king that embodies perfect joy over your life. And that king, not only is He ruling in heaven and on earth, but He's going to rule in your life. He's going to come, and He's not a mean, cruel king. He's a king of mercy. And I love that so much because when we talk about the rule and the reign of the kingdom, on one hand, it should bring a kind of hope for many of you. Those of you that know Jesus, know that Jesus has come, and know that Jesus has saved you. There is a kind of beauty and treasure knowing that Jesus, when he comes, he's going to reconcile all things. But for others of you, and I want you to feel this, that when the King comes and your life is not submitted to Jesus, that should not bring up a feeling of hope. It should actually bring up a feeling of dread for you. Because punishment's coming. Because one of the ways that God reconciles all things to himself is he does that through his Son. He punishes the sins of his people on his Son, but the sins of those who have not submitted to the King, they'll take the punishment of their own sin, and they'll bear that punishment forever. And so the invitation of the King of Kings as ruler and merciful King is the King that says, you can come to me. You don't have to stay at a distance. You don't have to give everything that you are. In fact, I've given everything that I am for you so that you can enjoy all the pleasure, all the peace, all the joy of what it means to be in my kingdom.